Hello everyone, this is Erik, the Asian movie enthusiast, and welcome to part 3 of our excursion into Asian horror films from the year 2005. All of the movies I'm going to cover in this video I enjoyed to a greater or lesser degree. Some interesting stuff here, and a nice variety as well, which is a theme for this particular year, and I think many years in Asian horror actually. So let's begin. And as always, titles for all of the movies I discuss will be listed in the description box below. And the first film we're covering tonight is from Thailand, and that is Buppah Rahtree 2, Rajshree Returns. And this is a Thai horror comedy. So the vengeful female ghost, Buppah, continues to inhabit apartment 609. She shares a room with her ghost boyfriend, who has been left legless by Bupa after his transgressions in the first film. Now, these ghosts interact with a blind woman and 4 bank robbers who are using the apartment as a hideout. So the ghosts seem fine with the residents of the complex and focus most of their animosity towards those who visit and cause trouble. So these Bupa Rahtree movies have their own feel, with an odd blend of horror, drama, and comedy. And I think that's a good thing. This is one of those Thai horror hybrids that works pretty well in general. This film's predecessor did have its fair share of jump scares, but there's too much reliance, I think, on this sequel on loud noises and jumpy moments. And that's an obvious negative for me personally, as you may know by now. And it does get a little obnoxious after a while. I think this film there's too many jump scares. And this is something that creeps up from time to time in Thai horror films. But there are some positives here, okay? There are some interesting moments that help to offset this flaw. Like the blood room sequence near the end, which is particularly cool. I won't spoil that one for you. But I think the most disturbing moment in this film is actually between the ghosts themselves, which is kind of odd. They do not have a good relationship with one another, the ghosts in this movie. So that's kind of an interesting nuance there, I guess. Now, outside of the jump scares, I think that this is an entertaining flick. And it has some pretty good atmosphere to it, some decent acting here. And the humor is kind of, I think it's more hit than miss, but it does have its misses as well. But I think overall, the humor is pretty effective. Perhaps not quite as good as the first film in this franchise, but it's worth a watch if you enjoyed Rahtree Flower of the Night. So Buppah Rahtree 2, I think, is a pretty good flick. I recommend it. Now, the DVD availability of this one is that, unfortunately, it's difficult to find. It does occasionally show up on YouTube, sometimes without subtitles, sometimes with subtitles, so you'll have to keep your eye out for that one. Obviously, try to watch the first film in this series first. Then if you like that one, then you can move on to the sequels. Alright, our next film here is another film from Thailand, actually. And this is another one that really doesn't get mentioned all that often. And that one is P, also known as Possessed, a Thai horror drama. So in an attempt to earn money, a teenage girl is taken to a shady dance bar that provides prostitutes to foreigners. She subsequently uses black magic for her own purposes, but it just might lead to her demise. Now, this movie has a British director behind the scenes here named Paul Spurrier, but most of the cast and crew are actually Thai, so it's mostly a Thai film with a little bit of a British flavor to it here. Now, after an atmospheric opening set amidst the forests of Thailand, it moves to Bangkok in the city, and takes a while to set up the plot. This is actually a good thing because this film establishes a good dramatic basis, I think. This director apparently did 5 or more years of research before production of this film, and there seems to be an authentic feel to the lifestyle of our protagonist. I think the lead actress is quite good as well. I liked her. There are some interesting superstitions presented, and the second half of the story has a constantly dark feel to it. So this starts off, I would say, more like a drama, and then gradually shifts into a horror film, which I like. I do think that a few of the scare tactics are slightly cheesy, And the ending is a little bit of a disappointment, maybe a little bit of an anticlimax, but this film is quite different due to its theme of prostitution and its blending of black magic with that theme. So P is a pretty good flick that I recommend. Availability for this one is that it is actually widely available on DVD, which I found surprising when I checked the other day because no one ever talks about this flick, and I think it's pretty good. Now the next film here, we move back to our familiar place for horror, and that is Japan, of course. This one has a little bit of a familiar feel to it, but the execution, I think, helps it, and that is Prey. Now, two young adults, a man and his girlfriend, kidnap a little girl and hold her for ransom to pay off a drug-related debt. So as they hide out at an abandoned school, they attempt to call the girl's parents, only to find out from her parents that she has been dead for a year already. So the kidnapper's friends arrive with ulterior motives of their own, and that also causes problems. So soon, the members of this group are killed by an unseen force one at a time. Now, is this mysterious little girl responsible for this, or is something far more sinister at work? That's the question that's posed here. Now, this is a cheaper production compared to some other things that I would recommend here in this playlist, with an inconsistent acting to it. There's, when you're dealing with lower budget films, sometimes the acting can be a little dodgy. I think the acting in this one is a bit inconsistent, and some details are a bit confusing, I think. You might have to watch this film a few times and kind of fill in some of the gaps for yourself. But I do think that the screenplay helps to keep the viewer off balance here a little bit, with multiple threats and fragmented flashbacks. So again, this is one of those films that kind of makes you think a little bit, and, that's a good thing. I was definitely engaged while watching this film, if only to piece together and understand how everything comes together at the end. And I do think it does come together. I would not classify this as a puzzle-solving film, though. Some films I've recommended before, something like Spider Forest, very puzzle-solving, or A Tale of Two Sisters is another fantastic puzzle-solving film. But there are some complications to Prey for you to iron out in your head. As I mentioned before, multiple viewings might help you here. So there's some rewatchability factor to this. Now, aesthetically, this does have similarities to many other Japanese ghost films of this era, in that it is deliberately paced and also has an atmosphere to it. Kind of I always think glacial pacing assists the atmosphere because it kind of gets you into the mood, you know what I mean? So you have that duality or that combination, I guess, of a deliberate pace and some atmospheric lighting and camera work and that type of thing. And it also has a good score to it as well, a creepy score. So all those things, you know what to expect from a good Japanese horror film in terms of aesthetics and atmosphere, and Prey actually gives that to you despite its limited budget. So that's another positive to this. Overall, I enjoyed this one. Some people think it's maybe a little bit too cliched for their liking, but I think the execution does make it a watchable flick. Now, it is widely available on DVD. That will be a trend that we're going to see in this particular video. I know when I first started this playlist, there was a handful of films here and there that would be tough to find, but I promised that they would get a little bit easier to find when we hit this, Asian horror DVD boom that happened in the 2000s. So a lot of these films are widely available, so if you're interested in any of them, they should be pretty easy to find. Now our next film here, we move to South Korea. And this is another one that, this is one of the ones that I thought was just kind of okay the first time I saw it. Then I rewatched it years later and enjoyed it a little bit more. And that is Red Eye. So, July 16th, 1988, a night train, or red eye, to Yosu leaves Seoul Station and crashes, killing 250 people. Now, exactly 15 years later to the day, a train is running the same line for the last time, but it has incorporated some of the coaches from the old crashed train. Now, a stewardess who manages a drinks and food trolley on the train has just started the job and switched shifts with another woman to take that train. So her father was a guard who died on the crash train 15 years ago, and some people blamed him for it. Now, this woman is the main character in this film, and she actually has psychic powers as well, and gets glimpses of the dead from the earlier train crash who now ride the train with the passengers. So from this plot synopsis, this seems like a very cliched film. There's a lot of cliches in this. You got the psychic thing, you got the contrivances of, the crash train 15 years ago to the day here, and they're using some of the same coaches. I forgot exactly why they did that. I think of maybe a few of the coaches on the new train were out of service, and they used some of the older ones, something like that. So it's kind of contrived, a little bit cliched there, and you get the psychic stuff. But this is a pretty good flick, I think. I enjoyed this one. The ghost girl, again, does show up a few times, which gives the scare tactics a certain familiarity. But the execution is rather good, and the train setting helps to mix things up. From most other Korean horror films, there's not that many Korean horror films that take place on trains. In fact, Japanese horror films don't either. There's not a lot of Asian films where, the entire film is set on a train like this one is, so it's a little different. The deliberate pacing and sound effects, again, help to maintain some atmosphere, and the main protagonists are likable. But again, to touch upon the atmosphere thing again, this is one of those cliches that I really like about Asian horror. There's something about the way they film these movies. They can infuse a certain deliberate atmosphere that really works for me. So even if there's certain other flaws, the film has a better chance of keeping me engaged with what's going on if you have that engaging atmosphere to it. You can really get into the world it creates, and you feel a little creepy at times, and it keeps you going, you know what I mean? Now, Il-guk Sung actually has a supporting role in this. He's one of the male leads, but it's basically a supporting role where he kind of pops in and out. And this was a big plus for me as well, because he was the star of the excellent Jumong television drama from South Korea, it could be my favorite TV series of all time. It's really good stuff. I'll do a review of that one in the future. I gotta rewatch it. It's a long series, though, so I have to rewatch it first, and then I'll do a review of it, probably sometime next year. So, Red Eye does, it meanders a bit. It has some cliches. And I would say it doesn't really have a super strong story to it either, but there's something about this one, probably on a superficial level, that's kind of entertaining to watch. So I recommend this one. If you don't mind some of the cliches of Asian horror, if you want to get away from some of the cliches, and you're not really in the mood for some of those familiar tropes of Asian horror, this wouldn't be a film to watch that particular night. But if you're ready to go back to the well and get something that is familiar but has a few little nuances and is pretty well executed on an aesthetic level, check out Red Eye. So this is widely available, again, on DVD. Pretty good flick. Now we mix it up here with the next one. We move back to Thailand, but it's one of the nastier ones for sure. This could be the nastiest Thai horror film that I've seen. It's up there. And that is Art of the Devil 2. So, a teacher uses witchcraft to seek revenge on a group of students in this extremely gory film. So basically, a group of friends experience conflict between each other, their family members, and their teachers. So long story short, there was some sexual infidelity between some of these characters, which results in a disturbing sexual assault sequence. And that eventually leads to the use of witchcraft later on. Now, we covered the first Art of the Devil film during our exploration of 2004, and I mentioned that Art of the Devil was mostly forgettable and lacked memorable witchcraft sequences. Now, let me tell you, Art of the Devil 2 does not suffer from that problem, because it has some of the nastiest violence you're ever going to see in a Thai horror film. I won't spoil the bloody surprises for you in detail, but I will say that there is some wince-worthy, uncomfortable, disturbing stuff in this. So if you're not in the mood for like a Thai ghost film, you're into something a little nastier, Art of the Devil 2 will please you, I think. Now there was also a strong human conflict at work in this. and that makes it interesting to watch. The human conflicts in this are pretty intense. I wouldn't say that the story or the characters are really deep, but their conflicts themselves, it's affecting and kind of disturbing. So some of my gripes with this movie are that the editing during the opening 30 or so minutes is not well executed, thus making a simplistic story too confusing with a lot of unnecessary flashbacks and pockets of undeveloped themes. I felt like the opening 30 minutes should have been streamlined and conveyed in a more linear fashion. It seems like one of those films where it was convoluted just for the sake of being convoluted early on. Didn't really add much of anything. So I think if they could have restructured the opening 30 minutes to be a little bit more linear and simplistic, it would have had a stronger effect. Let's see here. Oh, and the protagonists also make a few dumb decisions along the way, so just look out for that. But still, Art of the Devil 2 packs a lot more punch than its predecessor does. A lot more punch. So for those in the mood for some great death torture scenes, and some of them are fairly lengthy as well, this should hit the spot nicely. Kind of an unorthodox contribution from Thailand, but I recommend this one. In fact, I almost feel like rewatching it. I haven't seen this one in years. And Art of the Devil 2 is widely available on DVD. And as I said before, you don't have to see the first Art of the Devil film to see Art of the Devil 2. They're separate stories. Alright, so I recommend you start with Art of the Devil 2. If you like that, then move to Art of the Devil 3, which I'm going to get to in a later year. And then if you like that one, then you can shift back to Art of the Devil 1 and see if you can, either for the sake of completion or to see if you enjoy it. But I think parts 2 and 3 are better than the first one. Alright, here. And we mix it up again. So we move from a few traditional films, I guess, familiar cliche type films like Prey and Red Eye. Then we move to a torture like witchcraft flick in Art of the Devil 2, and now we shift to a zombie horror comedy from Japan. And that film is Tokyo Zombie. Alright, this is a comedy horror hybrid and is much lighter than the last film we covered. So Fujio and Mitsuo are two full-time slackers who work in a fire extinguisher factory. The two spend their lunch hours training to fulfill their dreams of being jiu-jitsu champions. And from what I remember, they're not very good. But one day, they murder their boss and dump his body on a Tokyo toxic waste dump known as Black Fuji. Things suddenly become worse when an army of the undead rises from the waste dump and begin to attack the living. So in order to survive, they have to employ their limited jiu-jitsu skills to either help or escape Tokyo. So while most Asian zombie films during the turn of the century fail rather miserably in my opinion, not a big fan of the subgenre, Asian or otherwise, but I feel that this film is a little bit of an exception. Most surprisingly, it contributes some outrageous, creative events, while at the same time avoiding a descent into annoyance. Zombie flicks that are horror comedies do tend to annoy me a little bit, either in terms of the style of horror or the characters themselves, and I guess their particular style of humor as well. But Tokyo Zombie worked for me. In typical Japanese fashion, and you see this a lot in Japanese comedies, the stoic-minded characters underact when confronted with all kinds of danger and absurdity. And you see this especially with Tadanobu Usano as a lead actor, because he's like the master of low-key reactions to crazy events. Check out Survive Style 5 from 2004 if you don't believe me. He does a lot of that kind of, I don't know what you would call it, underacted kind of responses to completely insane events. I really like that about him. And he uses that a lot in this film, and I think it works. Now, in this film, Asano actually grows an afro and fights zombies with Sho Aikawa by his side. Sign me up. You will recognize Aikawa because he has starred in many films by some popular Japanese directors, like Takashi Miike and Kiyoshi Kurosawa. So these two actors really carry the film, and if you're a fan of either one or both of these actors, that's really going to enhance your enjoyment of Tokyo Zombie. On the negative side, though, I do think that the fights themselves are very clumsy and sloppy, with nothing in terms of good action here. But they typically result in a number of chuckle-worthy moments, which is probably the whole point of them being clumsy and sloppy. But it would have been nice to maybe add a third character and have him kick some butt, you know what I mean? But overall, I think Tokyo Zombie is definitely one of those oddball films that is definitely a little bit different from a typical zombie horror comedy. And if you're into something a little different, check this one out. You'll get a chuckle out of it. So Tokyo Zombie is widely available on DVD. Again, not one that's discussed very often. In fact, I would say of the films we've covered so far, I rarely hear them mentioned. Maybe a little bit of Art of the Devil too, but there's some good stuff here. Now the next film on our list, we have to move to Japan. Japan, and it's a sequel to a film we covered a few years ago on our playlist, and that is One Missed Call 2. Now the cursed voicemail chain continues in this sequel, which has a similar overall plot. When a group of teens start receiving a one missed call display on their cell phone screens, they hear terrifying voice messages documenting their very own anguished death throes. So this is similar to the first film. Even if this film occurred, this film occurs approximately 1 year after the events of the first film, and it includes some explicit references to its predecessor. Even a few flashback scenes from the first film, which is kind of interesting. So this is picking right up a year right after the last film left off in the story. The main protagonist from the first film is actually missing, so the protagonists in this one are a different set of people. So if you're a fan of Kao Shibazaki, she is not in this film basically at all, except for a few of the footage flashback clips from the first One Missed Call film. So don't expect her to be in this. Now, One Missed Call 2 has some of the flaws that you would expect from a sequel. It uses some of the countdown mystery structure elements where characters have to figure things out before the time of their impending death arrives, and we've seen that multiple times already in Asian horror. That's a big cliche at this point. And there are some other rehashes that limit the creativity on display, I think. The Onryo Ghost being one such example, and the way that it's used. Also, the pacing maybe does drag slightly during the middle section, and the finale does lack like a big-time disturbing horror sequence. However, there are more than enough positives here, I think, to recommend this one. Now, the big contribution of this film, and what makes it so interesting, is that the storyline is far more complex than the original film. It addresses some of the open questions left from its predecessor and answers a few of those, and then it also introduces a more nuanced backstory to the origin of the curse from the first film. The script forces the viewer to think about these things, so you really have to pay attention to this one, and the details especially, in order to figure these things out. And in that sense, this movie is surprisingly thought-provoking, I think, and somewhat ambitious in its storytelling structure. That's one of the things, again, I enjoy about Asian horror films. I mentioned this when I was talking about Prey just a few minutes ago, but even in sequels like One Missed Call 2, they can be very engaging and interesting despite having some cliches present. Just because if you're interested in figuring out what's going on, you got to be working. Your brain's got to be working here, because there might be a line of dialogue. You miss that line of dialogue, that's an important clue to help you figure out what's going on. This is one of those films that you gotta be on your game here. Now, in terms of horror, this movie does have quite a few scares in it. There's one cool death scene in a shower that I enjoyed early on, and there are also a few cutaway edits that really creep me out in this one. And I actually missed them the first time I saw the film because it cuts away quick. And what I mean by cutaway is that, a scene is playing out. Okay, you have one take here, and then right before it cuts to the next edit, another camera angle, you might see a ghost like pull out from around the corner, and it just starts pulling out, and then the scene cuts away. So if you're not, if you're focusing on the main protagonist, you might not catch it in the background the first time you're watching the film. But when you watched it the second time, I noticed a few of these scenes in the back and creeped me out a little bit, so that's pretty cool. Kind of a similar strategy that Ju-on the Curse implemented. Now, one other thing I want to mention here about One Missed Call 2 is that the lead actress also appeared in the Death Note live-action films, and she played L's agent who went toe-to-toe with Kira during the finale of the first film, so it's nice to see her here as well. I'd like to see her in some other films. I gotta check her filmography out. I like her. She's a good actress. So in summary, One Missed Call 2 may not be quite as purely entertaining as its predecessor, but its added complexity definitely makes it worth a watch. One Missed Call 2 is widely available, of course, on DVD. Alright, so now we're got a handful left here for tonight. So we've covered a nice variety, I think. We have hit a few, I guess, traditional supernatural type flicks in this series, this video tonight. But now we move on to something a little bit different, and that is called The Last Supper, a Japanese horror film. Now, one night, a talented plastic surgeon played by Masaya Kato, a very underrated actor, takes home some leftover fat from a liposuction procedure and fries it up for dinner. Ugh. But the taste of this forbidden flesh fuels his desires, and he soon embarks on a killing spree to acquire fresh human meat. Obsessed with eating human flesh, he devises ever more imaginative methods to indulge his appetites in this cannibalistic chiller. So the storyline here, I think, is quite good in this one. It provides a set of flashbacks that explain how he discovered this delicacy, I guess you could say, as well as some entertaining plot developments involving other characters. This film focuses a lot on the mentality behind cannibalism, which is interesting, as well as the underground society of cannibals that is eventually explored. And that provides a nice foundation for the film as a whole. There is a sufficient amount of gore and bloody scenes for those who enjoy that type of thing. And there's also some good, unorthodox use of music and effective lighting, too. I thought the scoring of this film was a bit different from a typical horror film, and I liked it. Now, on the negative side, it is a bit convenient in how quickly our protagonist is able to kind of get into and infuse himself into the underground cannibal society that is introduced when he visits Hong Kong during the middle of the film. But, you know, I can kind of forgive that a little bit since it's kind of interesting to watch. Also, the end of this movie is hilarious, and it's intentionally hilarious. There's a blackly humorous scene. I won't spoil for you, but I was like shaking my head like, wow, they really went there. That was pretty fun. So this film has definitely another oddball film in this video. Kind of like Tokyo Zombie or something like that. Although this one I think is probably overall a higher quality film in terms of it establishing and developing its themes. So The Last Supper, some people really like this one. So this might be one to put on a higher priority list for you. It's a good flick. And The Last Supper is widely available on DVD. Both, or wait a second here. No, that's not. That's the wrong note there. One Missed Call 2. I'm sorry, I had the wrong note here. The DVD availability for One Missed Call 2 is that it is widely available, and there's a box set for that one. The Last Supper is also widely available, but it's only by itself, obviously, because this is only one film in its particular series. So check that one out. Now, the next film here is a Chinese language horror film, but it is not from Hong Kong. It's from mainland China. Now, this one's another one that's very unorthodox stuff, and that is Suffocation. So after recently killing his unfaithful wife and sending her body out to sea, a man suspects that her ghost may be dwelling in a cello case he used to move the body from the crime scene. So haunted by his misdeed and tortured by his mental sickness, he descends further into madness. Now, this is a very artsy horror film, I'm going to tell you. Mostly because there's not much in terms of traditional storytelling to it, and the dialogue is very minimal. Some viewers may not like its simplicity and repetition, but there are a few nuances and references for those who are paying attention. Now, the sound design in this is really good, which helps to create a gloomy mood from start to finish. and water imagery is heavily used as a symbol for the lead character's subconscious suffocation, so to speak. So remember a few videos ago when I said that Ryung had, the South Korean film Ryung, also known as A Ghost, had more water visuals, surprisingly, than Ring-U and Dark Water did? Well, Suffocation has even more than Ryung did. So if you're into a water-drenched film, definitely check this one out. It's probably excessive, because, like, there's stretches where, like, every single shot is some reference to water in it. But it's very atmospheric, and it has some nice use of fog that's added at times to, like, the water elements. So this is pretty cool film visually, for sure. This is slow going, okay? As I mentioned before, it's kind of artsy and slow, but it can be appreciated by those who like deliberately paced atmospheric horror films. Check this one out. And Suffocation, surprisingly, is widely available on DVD. Another one that nobody ever talks about. There's a lot of films in 2005 that just don't get much play, despite the fact that they're pretty good. All right, and then we shift back to South Korea for our next film here, and that is The Wig. A young woman is struggling against cancer, and her older sister decides to take her home so that she can enjoy what little time she has left, rather than to spend it in a hospital. Now, the older sister is a mute caused by a car accident which impaled her throat, but is a very strong person and very caring for her younger sibling. She buys a long-haired wig for her little sister so that she can go out without having to feel ashamed of herself, so that's nice. But what this older sister doesn't know is that the wig is cursed. But it's not your typical curse, because this girl begins to act and look a lot healthier and far more attractive with the wig on. So there's a positive effect to this curse, at least temporarily. But as we all know, horrific events may be right around the corner. So the wig moves nicely. It's nicely paced. It focuses heavily on the relationship between the sisters, which is a good thing in this case. Characters, I think, are developed very well here, as are their plights and their dilemmas, each having their own insecurities and fears that play into the horror scenes. Scare tactics, a bit of a mixed bag here, but there are a few effective moments that are a bit hard to watch, actually, and quite bloody, surprisingly. The acting is solid from both leads, and there are a few unexpected twists along the way. This is another one that has grown on me over time as I rewatch it occasionally. The Wig, it's a pretty good flick. DVD availability of this one, it is moderately available on DVD. So, and maybe, I don't know if this one's shifting to Blu-ray or not, but there's not quite as many copies floating around of The Wig. Now, our final film of this video is another very interesting one. Kind of an odd video tonight, isn't it? We got, a handful of, very traditional, I guess, even a little bit cliched Asian horror films in there, and then we got some real, oddball stuff, too. And this film is from Japan, and it is called Neighbor Number 13. So a man suffered all kinds of abuse from his classmates as a child, and this permanently scarred his personality. Now, as an adult, he has developed a terrifying alter ego who retaliates against those who wrong him. Now, after taking a job at a construction company, he is bullied and intimidated by his aggressive boss, which spurs his other personality into action. This story has some welcomed creativity in terms of how it proficiently features the everyday life of the main character, which slowly increases his frustrations that eventually leads to some horrific events. The deaths, I think, are mostly tame. Not a whole lot of graphic violence to this one at all, and some of them occur off-screen, actually. But the disturbing nature of the alter ego is sufficiently expressed through his mannerisms and threatening nature alone. The actor that plays his alter ego, because it's a different actor, does a very good job. Very creepy guy. Now, there are a few surreal dream sequences that are pretty weird and have significant stylistic value. For example, the opening scene is loaded with sweat, pus, and blood. And it just wallows in this imagery for 5 minutes. This film begins with a very kind of grimy, uncomfortable scene. And that really sets the tone for the whole film, which is kind of grimy. There's lots of bodily fluids in this, mostly sweat. A lot of people are sweating in this one, man, and it's set during the hot days of summer. So if you're in for like a hot days of summer horror film, this is one of them. You'll probably want to take a shower after it's over, I'll tell you that much. I do like how the psycho is actually the protagonist of the film. He's the main character. And he's played by Shun Oguri, who is a popular actor nowadays in Japan. The antagonist in this film, which is his boss really, is a raging jerk early on, who beats the protagonist physically at work. I mean, he'll immediately make you just angry. Like, you just want this guy just to get his head plunged in. But the presence of his wife and child give him a little bit of relatability and vulnerability, and that grows as the film progresses. So you kind of have this situation where you have a protagonist and antagonist, but as the film progresses, you kind of, I don't know, you don't quite hate the protagonist quite as much as it moves along, and you don't quite like the protagonist as much as you did early on as it moves along. So this is pretty good. Neighbor Number 13 is a fairly slow-paced film, though, and it is almost 2 full hours long. So it does feel maybe a little bit drawn out, but it uses that time to develop the psychological elements very well. This is a very psychological horror film. And the ending, I think, is a very nice touch. I like the ending quite a bit in this. So I definitely recommend Neighbor Number 13. And it is widely available on DVD. So have at it. So that's it for part 3 on this journey through Asian horror films released in 2005. And be sure to join me for part 4, when I will continue to cover and review the more interesting films of this year. Very good year for this industry, I think. Even if you just look at some of the films in this video, there's some really interesting stuff here. So, as always, we'll see you next time.